Simon here, still making things and ready for some serious transformation. Welcome back to part 2 of our Borderlands blaster build. Today I'm going to show you a bunch of simple budget-friendly techniques to take your cosplay props from plain to painted awesomeness. No fancy airbrushes or expensive paints needed. In part 1 I told you about teaming up with Confetti, the game development college here in Nottingham, to do some workshops mixing game design and cosplay. I grabbed an old NERF blaster and with just hand tools and simple techniques, no 3D printing, turned it into something you'd see in Borderlands. So, in this part, I'll show you how I took the blaster, now ready for paint, and gave it a proper Borderlands paint job, demonstrating lots of ways to get awesome metal effects. It's essential to start with a plan. I had 3 initial paint ideas from my sketches, but once the blaster was built, I decided to mix and match the best bits to create a final design that will let me show you a whole bunch of painting techniques in this video. Now, while I usually reach for spray cans or the airbrush when painting my props, for my student workshops in this video, I wanted to go for a more accessible approach that avoids paint fumes and the need for a well-ventilated workshop just to add colour. This also meant I could print out my design, set up my paints in the craft room, grab a coffee and simply start painting. The paints I chose are all base paints from the Citadel colour range, typically used for Warhammer figures. They offer a great colour selection and fantastic coverage. You remember that part 1 ended with a black primed blaster. I went with black instead of grey or white because it just naturally gets into all of those nooks and crannies and shadowed areas, saving you the bother of trying to poke your brush into those tricky spots later on. Now, one thing to keep in mind with a black undercoat is you'll probably need a few coats to really build up your colour, as it can dull things down a bit. However, for this sci-fi battlefield weapon, we're actually going for those more subdued and battle-worn colours anyway. If you're making something super clean and brightly coloured, you definitely want to start with a brighter undercoat. This all meant I had to lay down 3 thin coats of Mephiston red to get the result I wanted. Just gently get that colour down with a nice big brush, spread it around as much as you can to keep those brush strokes minimal, and trust me, they'll disappear as you build up those thin layers. Take your time, let each coat dry properly and enjoy the process. Because my design also had some seriously bright pink flames and yellow graffiti, I knew painting straight over the red wouldn't give me the pop I was after, so I lightly penciled my designs onto the blaster and then, with a finer brush, painted those areas with Corax white. While the white was drying, I started painting the other flame details with Phoenician purple. Being darker than Mephiston red, this went straight over the top, no problem. And just a quick note, while I kept glancing at my colour design sketch, I was also adapting the paint job to what felt right for the actual 3D blaster. That's exactly how production design art works in games too. It's a starting point, a stepping stone to the final object. When you go from that 2D drawing into 3D, whether it's in real life or on the computer, you'll always adapt the design to suit. Then I grabbed the wonderfully bubblegum Fulgrim pink and painted right over the white I'd laid down earlier. It popped exactly how I wanted it to. Just a little tip, while I was doing this, my brush wandered off for the white undercoat in a few spots. That's bound to happen. I just let the pink dry and then tidied up some edges by painting some red back over the top. More white undercoat next, this time some of it over the purple. This Borderlands paint job really reminds me of a graffiti wall, so it needs to be layered up in the same kind of way. On the other side of the blaster, I decided to just go for it. I hadn't actually created a design for both sides. I painted the COV symbol from Borderlands 3 because this weapon clearly would have belonged to one of the children of the Vault. Now, there are times when you want some seriously sharp lines on your paint job, and that's where masking tape comes in handy. I made sure that the red coat on what we call the power cell in the last episode was completely dry, and then I laid out my designs using some masking tape. This masking tape is specifically made for scale models. It comes in very small widths, gives you an incredibly clean edge, and is designed for delicate surfaces. You can definitely use decorator's masking tape and cut it down, but just be careful, it doesn't pull up the paint or layers underneath or allow paint to bleed under the edge, so you might want to do a little test piece first just to be safe. With the masking applied, I painted on some more Corax white as an undercoat, being careful to brush over the edges of the masking tape in a way that minimised the likelihood of the paint bleeding. You'll also notice I was using the covering plate as a guide for how far I actually need to paint, because there's no point in painting anywhere that's never going to be seen. Then, right over the top of the remaining white, I went in with Avalon Sunset Yellow. You can really see how that white undercoat makes the yellow easy to apply and really pop. And here's one of the most satisfying parts of the entire build, peeling off the masking tape. With any paint job, you'll want to remove the masking tape when the surface is dry to the touch but not fully cured. Too early and you'll risk smudging the wet paint. Too late and the tape might end up pulling off some of the new paint, leaving a jagged or uneven edge. So we're halfway through now, and I just wanted to jump in and say that I really hope that if I've inspired you to make something cool, that it brings you even a fraction of the joy that I get from these projects. And as always, let me take a quick moment to speak directly to you, the person behind that screen, and thank you for spending your valuable time with me today. I just want to say thank you, truly. And I want you to know that you matter. Regardless of what's happening in the world or your own circumstances right now, you're special. And I have faith that if things are tough for you at the moment, you'll really get through it. I really believe that. So keep on hanging in there, and thank you. For the rest of this video, we're going full on metal. Because let's face it, one of the biggest challenges for prop and cosplay builders, especially those of us who don't have a machine shop at our disposal, is how to make something that isn't metal look convincingly like it. One little trick I often use in my builds is to incorporate actual metal parts wherever I can. Things like screw heads, metal washers, bits from old laptops or hard drives, or leftover fittings from DIY projects. And as you saw in part 1, this blaster already has some real metal plates and other bits and pieces on it. But for the purpose of this video, I decided to paint everything first and then show you a range of methods other than spray cans, vacuum metallizing and electroplating that can really sell that metallic look on your props. So let's dive into the metallic paints. Here I'm using some Iron Hand Steel base paint from Citadel, and my number one tip with any metallic paint is to mix it thoroughly. You want all those tiny metal particles, no matter what brand you're using, to be evenly distributed throughout the paint. Then, instead of grabbing paint directly from the pot, put it a little bit on your palette and spread it around a bit. The first technique we'll look at is dry brushing. This is fantastic for areas with a lot of texture, where you want to really pick out all those small details and sharp edges. The way I do this is start with a black base coat, then I take a very short hairbrush. You can buy specialised dry brushes, but I'm just using a regular stiff paintbrush that I've simply snipped down with scissors. I lightly dip the tip of the brush into the paint, and before you even touch your prop, you need to dry brush most of the paint off onto a textured non-porous surface. I've even made my own dry brush palette, just some small tray with some plastic bits glued on and sprayed black. Just a heads up, don't use a paper towel for this, as it'll absorb the water from the paint and give you a dusty finish. With dry brushing, you just want to lightly dust randomly over your surface, really trying to catch those edges. Be patient, build up the effect with multiple thin layers and let the surface of the part guide you where the paint needs to go, allowing those panel lines and recesses to naturally show through where the brush can't easily reach. Switching over to a regular paintbrush, this is great for flatter areas or picking out small details to make them stand out. Here I'm using just a tiny amount of paint on the very tip of my brush and gently laying it down, minimising brush strokes to highlight a few details and screw heads. In my experience, it's best to really feather on metallic paints with a brush. The thinner and more even the coat, the more the result will start to look like actual metal. And for the sake of completeness, let's talk about the humble silver Sharpie. Now, you'll see that this isn't necessarily the best way to apply a full metal finish to your props. It takes a fair bit of time and you have to work at getting that metallic paint off the tip of the pen evenly. But it's often an absolute lifesaver for quick fixes. If you're at a convention and you notice a paint chip on your blaster or armour, revealing the plastic underneath, just pull out a silver Sharpie and quickly touch it up. I've definitely done that with more than once with some of my Star Wars blasters after an event. Next up, let's explore some methods for getting a real metal finish on your props. The first one to use is graphite powder. You can easily buy this online. It's often used for lubricating locks, or you can even make your own by taking some sandpaper and a very soft pencil, something like a 6B for example, and gently sanding down the tip to create a small pile of graphite dust. This technique is ideal for large, smooth surfaces where you want an even metallic sheen. If you apply graphite powder over a smooth white undercoat, you can almost achieve like a mirror-like chrome finish. A grey undercoat gives you a more classic metal look, and black, well, you'll see how that looks right here. Because graphite powder can spread around quite easily, I carefully masked off the areas of the barrels that I didn't want to look metallic. Then, using my fingertip, I rubbed the graphite onto the blaster. Now, I haven't done this for a while, and this was probably a bit of a mistake. Definitely use a makeup sponge or a piece of cotton wool instead. It's far less messy. Once the graphite was applied, I buffed away the remaining excess with a paper towel. One thing you'll find with metallic finishes is that the smoother the surface you apply them to, the more reflective they appear. Here, we've got a duller metallic finish, but I've seen incredible mirror-sheen Mandalorian helmets done with this same technique. To get that kind of look, you really need to sand the surface of your prop to an insanely smooth degree. We're talking 3000 grit sandpaper and above, and then use a glossy mid-grey undercoat before applying the graphite. So, time to peel off the masking tape and move on to the next technique. This is Rub and Buff. It's a paste made from fine metal powder and carnauba wax. Now, carnauba wax comes from a Brazilian palm tree and is used in everything from car wax to making M&Ms, which for me at least is yet another reason why I don't eat candy. Anyway, as the name suggests, you simply take a small amount of the paste, rub it on your surface, and then with a soft cloth or paper towel, buff it to a shine. The more you buff, the more heat you generate, and the more that shine really comes through. It's a simple and very effective way to give armor plates and droid domes a convincing metallic finish. I've even used rub and buff over existing metallic paint finishes to give them an extra layer of depth. A small tube really goes a long way, and it's available on multiple finishes from gold leaf to pewter. And finally, here's a way of laminating a piece of real metal onto your props. This works best for big flat areas like blades and swords, although it can be used for smaller panels inserts where appropriate. This is aluminium tape, or aluminum tape for those of our friends who are across the pond, and you can find it online sold in various widths on reels that are usually between 10 and 20 meters long. Here I'm using it on the MDF blade. I've chosen to cut a length that's longer than the blade and position the tape so that I'm using the widest area possible to hide any joins. Just like applying a screen protector to a phone, the best way to work is to remove a little of the backing at a time and slowly work across the blade, rubbing continuously to avoid any air bubbles. And if you do get an air bubble, just pop it with a pin and rub it out. But if you go slowly and steadily, this won't be a problem. I then use the sharp craft knife to carefully cut away any excess. I want the tape on both sides to meet right on the blade's edge. That way it's much harder to see any joins. There are some spots where the tape can't quite fold over. In those cases, I cut a very small patch and laid it in place, rubbing and pressing until any joins practically disappeared. Used in the right circumstances, metal tape is a fantastic way to get a genuine metal finish on your props. And if you're strategic about where you hide the joins, it's quite a satisfying process because with a little pressure and rubbing, you can make those joins virtually vanish. And lastly, here are another couple of ways to apply colour and details to your props. This stuff is called pinstriping tape. It's used to create decorative lines on cars and boats. It's also a staple for control panels in Star Wars, and you can use it if you want some nice clean lines on your props. Simply cut it the length you need and stick it in place. It's fantastic for recessed panel lines if your prop or droid has them. Although I didn't need to do it on this particular prop, if it refuses to stick down properly, just take a brush and apply a little PVA glue to the surface where you're putting the tape. Let the PVA dry for about a minute until it goes tacky and then lay down the tape. That little bit of extra glue will give you the adhesion you need. Another great option is printing things out on a colour printer. Here, I've made some chevron markings and printed them out in colour on some glossy photo paper. You can get special water slide decal paper, sticker paper, or even create your own stickers using an app on your phone. But for this low-cost build, I'm just using a regular printer. I've simply cut out my strips of paper, applied a little super glue to the back, and laid these pieces in place. You can see why I masked these areas during the application of the graphite. I wanted to give the glue the best chance of sticking down and staying there. With the paint job done, it's time to protect it. And this is my other concession to using spray cans. You might be able to do this with a brush and varnish. You absolutely don't have access to a space where you can spray. But certainly for a hand prop that has been painted with a paint designed for miniatures and models and be carried around for hours at a con, the paint job really needs some sealing. I've chosen to use a Rust-Oleum crystal clear semi-gloss spray. Just take the blaster outside and build up some thin layers to avoid any paint runs going over everything. You'll see it seals in the colour and gives the whole piece a semi-gloss sheen that makes this plastic space blaster look more like the real deal. Now, this is a tip I always try to share when it comes to putting metallic finishes on props. Metallic finishes are generally quite delicate and can easily take damage. Graphite can rub off, rub and buff can dull, and even spray paint and lacquers can easily flake off with moderate handling. So in general, I like to put down my metallic finish and seal everything with a clear coat spray. But, and this is particularly true for spray paint and lacquers, a clear coat can radically dull a metallic finish. In fact, some can reduce a vibrant spray chrome to a dull grey. So the trick I like to do is to reapply a second metallic coat on top of the clear coat. This means your prop gets both protected and has a fresh metallic top coat. So if you're at a con and the metallic finish wears away a little, you'll simply lose a bit of shine on the metal. You won't see any primer or undercoat being revealed. As you can see, for the graphite top coat, I masked over my chevron markings to contain the graphite. I didn't need to clear coat the blade as it's a hard wearing real metal finish, but I decided I wanted to achieve a brushed metal look. So I took a piece of steel wool and, choosing a consistent direction, I gently dragged the wool across the surface. This adds a bit of texture and on things like blades is another great way to minimise the appearance of joins between adjacent strips of tape. With everything now painted, it was time to finally assemble the blaster. My forethought way back in part 1 about putting a bolt into the power cell really paid off, securing those nuts on the inside with some 5-minute epoxy to prevent them ever coming loose. Capping that gaping hole in the side with a piece of Foamex, and finally securing the blade in place with some more 5 minutes epoxy. So here we are at the end of part 2 of this series with a final reveal, a factory fresh looking space blaster inspired by Borderlands, all created from a second-hand NERF toy using accessible tools and techniques. So in the final episode, I'll show you a bunch of weathering techniques on how to take your props and make them look like they've been lived in the world, how to add a little more story to them and make them look even better on camera. So that's how you can paint your blaster. Let me know about any cool accessible techniques that you've used in the comments. I always love learning new things. And if you found this helpful, sharing it with other makers, hitting that like button, or subscribing to the channel really helps us reach more people who might need it. Plus, subscribing means you won't miss the weathering techniques in the final part. So, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in part 3 with how we take this blaster to the next level. Thanks again. Bye-bye.